Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. Do you recall when Law described how when they give a talk, they imagine their relatives and ancestors standing behind them? I was really touched by that. I thought I'd do the same thing, and I realized I didn't really feel comfortable with that. Because I realized with my ancestors and relatives, I'd rather have them in front of me so I could see which ones are holding weapons. There's somewhat of a hypervigilant past. There was a question on how, if there are any instructions for how to listen to a Dharma talk. It's a really, really wonderful question. I noticed after listening to lots of Dharma talks, and maybe you've noticed this, that it's all kind of like the same talk, you know? There are variations in there. But I remember Gil Fronsdal talking about how to listen to a talk. And it's very interesting because after a long day of practice, you may be tired, you may be energized, you may be inspired, you may be shut down. He offered to imagine it like a shower. You know, you may have heard this before, but you're just sort of letting it pour over you and seeing what seeps in. Sometimes people like to listen to a talk and take notes because it helps them to kind of capture what's there or what's important. Some people like to have their eyes closed and really see it as just a continuation of the meditation practice. So during this talk, feel free to have your eyes closed or have your eyes open. I'm feeling a lot of inspiration by your presence and your practice this week, and I really want to honor you for bringing yourself so fully here. And I also want to honor those who aren't here. I know there are those who planned on being here for this retreat. One person in particular, Sandra Albert, was signed up for the retreat, but discovered she needed surgery. And I've been tracking her progress on lotsofhelpinghands.com. And she's out of surgery, having a rocky time, but still practicing. She wrote an email to a friend about her ongoing health issues, and I just love this line. She said, "On the bright side, I have definitely taken some huge steps toward living in the moment." And her friend Monica wrote to me, and she said, "Here's to all of us, remembering not to wait for those dire, crucial moments to commit more fully to experiencing each precious moment just as it is." Samani spoke so beautifully of the practice of remembering that you have not gone beyond sickness, you have not gone beyond old age, you have not gone beyond death. That everything you hold dear and delightful is destined to fall away. That you're an inheritor of your actions, you're the creator of your actions. Your thoughts and actions you will inherit. Remembering that, it's so powerful, it changes the entire game. Each of us has our relatives and our ancestors who are here with us during this retreat, and I imagine they've come to visit you at different times as you've been unwinding your entire life history here. And I'm really struck by how some people say to me how, meditation and yoga, it's so narcissistic. But my response to that is there's a difference between going through life without a whole lot of energy, when you're depleted going through life, and the difference between having your cup full and overflowing. You know those moments in life when you're just feeling so good you can't not be nice? My sense is that filling your cup is your responsibility. Because when you can fill your cup, you are serving in a very, very different way. It's the difference between being politically active from anger and being politically active from compassion. They're both effective, but they have a different quality. So it's helpful to remember that while you're practicing for yourself, everyone who knows you, everyone you touch, will be affected by your practice. They can't not. So it's helpful to remember the offering of merit, that whatever fruit you are generating in your practice through your sincere efforts, to dedicate that merit to yourself, but also continue to spread it out. I'd like to talk a little bit about the gift of the practice, the gift it is to engage in the way that you have this week, and to talk a little bit about the lenses through which you view your life, and how there are choices of how you can view, and they become more apparent in the practice of meditation. You know, when we talk about meditation, all we have is analogies. We're trying to describe the awakening of consciousness. So there's the analogy of the glass of muddy water. You know, you come in, you sit, the mind is just like that glass of muddy water, and if you sit long enough, the sediment begins to settle, and you begin to see a little more clearly. And perhaps that's been part of your experience now that we're a number of days into the practice. Another analogy is that the mind is like a puppy. You tell it to sit, it runs off. Two options in training a puppy. One is to whack it if it moves, and you're not going to get a very healthy puppy that way. The other is understanding that's the nature of a puppy. And with patience and persistence, the puppy begins to sit for longer and longer periods of time. The other analogy is how the mind is like a glass of champagne. All the bubbles at the surface, just popping thoughts all the time. You take an anchor, something to absorb your concentration, and you begin to transcend. And sometimes you actually touch the bottom of the champagne glass, that source of thought, of deep stillness. But quite often, you move with your anchor and you encounter one of those bubbles. It rides to the surface and you're suddenly thinking, pizza. I haven't had pizza in a really long time. At some point, you remember the practice. You re-engage with your anchor. A few moments later, another bubble pops to the surface, and you think, you know, the best pizza I ever had was in Chicago. Another analogy is how when you practice, the practice like a mountain. And as you be the mountain, you begin to recognize how the mind is just weather systems, how sensations are just swirling clouds in different weather systems, and yet there is something that is present and awake to it all. These analogies can be really helpful. And there are times when we get stuck. Many, many years ago, I was on a month-long retreat at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, and things were not going well for me. Someone in the seat next to me came 20 minutes late to every single sit and made a big noise out of like settling into her seat. There was someone else who had a cast on one leg, and she showed up late too. And because she needed a special seat, she had a lawn chair that she sat in. And so there'd be this clump she had a flip-flop on the other foot. So it was clump, clump, clump. And then she'd sit down in this old lawn chair, And then there was another guy up front who had a runny nose. And he wouldn't blow his nose. So there'd be these random moments of just... At some point, I had this fantasy of just in the middle of the sit to just stand up and say, get an alarm clock, $50 for a new lawn chair, and for God's sake, blow your nose. Maybe you could relate to any little pieces of that. In addition to that, I just was experiencing physical pain, and I found myself just shriveling into a tight knot of resentment. And then another walking period. And at some point, I just had a moment where I just thought, wait a minute. There are people who are cooking for me. There are people cleaning up after me. There are people whose full-time job is looking out for my welfare. And it just suddenly became a shift from resentful to kind of like mild celebration. To a moment of just recognizing, wait a minute, this is a gift. I love Sebene's description of sukha and dukkha and the axle hole, like when it's out of true. Even if it's a smooth road, you're going to have a bumpy ride. And I thought about that quite a bit, and I know there was forgiveness today, and the thoughts came to me in my sit of like I was thinking about forgiveness, and I thought, oh, I'm so sorry for being such an axle hole. But over time, have you felt some kind of centering? Perhaps. Maybe not. But maybe a little more centering in the midst of all the fluctuations and changes, both internally and externally. It's easy for me sometimes on retreat to feel resentment for the inconvenience of this artificial environment we're in. And there may have been times as well when you've had doubts about why you ever signed up for this. I also thought to myself, like, well, how many people would trade places with you to have this experience? And I realized not many, but that's beside the point. It's an incredible opportunity to explore in a way that you just can't any other way. To be in an environment that is utterly dedicated for you to relax and to pay attention. To be around like-minded people who share that dedication. I lived in an ashram for 24 years, and we kept trying to inspire each other to stay with the practice because it's hard. It's really hard to keep swimming upstream, as you know. There's one story I like to tell. I haven't told this one in a while. In the ashram, we would do our morning sadhana, our morning practices, quite early, like 5 or 5:30. And we were always looking for ways to stay inspired. So we were doing our yoga asanas. It was kind of pitch dark, maybe 60 or 70 people in a big room. And the instructor had this great idea to occasionally, as we're in our postures, to ring a bell and randomly open some scripture and just read from the scripture, as we're holding a posture. So in this particular posture, we were in the headstand. So imagine, 60, 70 people all in the headstand, pitch dark, little candle, the bell rings. And then he reads something that goes something like this. to take human form is rare. To take human form and be exposed to the Dharma, like to perennial teachings, is even more rare. To take human form, be exposed to the Dharma, and contemplate the Dharma is the rarest of rare. To take human form, be exposed to the Dharma, contemplate the Dharma, and practice the Dharma is the rarest. But then it went on. And all of those who give themselves to practice of the Dharma, only one in every 500 years will achieve full awakening. There was this little upside-down voice in the back of the room that said, "Gee, thanks, that's encouraging." And that was followed by a sound I had never heard before, I may never hear again, which was 70 people falling out of the headstand. And it is so rare. There are times I can just feel the surge right now to feel so blessed to have access to these practices that truly lead to freedom. Whether it's relative freedom or ultimate freedom, relative is pretty good. And at times maybe I've tasted some of the latter. And I've noticed as well that depending on the flux of how much energy I have, how open my heart is, I'm viewing life through different lenses. I remember a Dharma talk that Ram Dass gave long time ago, where he talked about how we operate from these different levels. And if you were to go to a party and you're living from pure survival, well, then you're asking yourself, am I going to be okay in this group of people? Am I safe? And you're living through that lens. Is there going to be food? Can I eat it? If you're coming from the sexual channel, well, then maybe you're scanning, who's the most radiant person in here that I could pursue? Or who's a predator here who might be, I need to look out for? If you're coming from the power channel, you might be thinking, so who are the power players here? How can I engage with them? Or how can I avoid being dominated by the power players? If you're coming from the heart, you might be sensing, who here is the most kind? Or who here is suffering? You're sensing through that lens. If you're coming from a place of, let's say, like soul, there's this sense of just seeing everyone who's on their own journey. Or just sensing how everyone is just this being of light in this transformational journey that we're sharing. I wanted to talk tonight about a few of these lenses that can be very helpful. The more you slow down, the more you can notice both how subtle these are, but how tremendously powerful they can be for bringing a greater sense of clarity. Just to lump them into two basic categories. One is the perception of energy and feeling. And the second is the perception of thoughts and thought forms. And maybe even toward awareness itself. I'd like to talk a little bit about how awareness of these can be very, very helpful for you when you are investigating the nature of your experience. When you are exploring anywhere you might be caught in physical pain or emotional turmoil or mental agitation. Anytime when you feel that there's something between you and feeling free. So the perception of energy and feeling is that awareness of what's happening in your body and how you're relating to it. Sometimes we experience this as kind of like a contraction and that contraction and expansion and lots of other subtlety to it. But as I was thinking about this, I was remembering a time when I went through airport security. I never look forward to airport security. I don't exactly blend into a crowd. When I teach, I often travel with this bamboo flute. So, 6'5" pencil neck geek with a weapon walking around an airport. I remember one time I was, the person who sort of checks to see if you're in the right place. And that person was really kind. And that felt really good. And then she sent me down the aisle where there was a really mean-looking TSA agent. Well, that felt bad. But then I went up to the TSA agent, and the TSA agent was in a good mood, and, that felt good. As I went on, the person kind of directing people to the scanning machine was really irritated and was sort of yelling at people about the liquid belts and shoes. And he looked at me like I was from another planet, and that felt bad. But I was able to take my computer out and take off my shoes without holding up the line, that pressure, and that felt good. And the TSA agent at the scanner looked pretty kind. That felt good. But then the person before me had some metal in their pocket, and they had to go back through, and that made me paranoid that maybe I had some metal in my pocket, so I slapped my pockets, and that felt bad. But I got through the scanner, and that felt good. But then my bag got pinged, and that felt bad. But the person who checked out my bag was really kind and apologetic, and that felt good. And I realized I'd gone about 60 feet, and I was exhausted. Can you relate? Have you noticed this fluctuation in your experience? How there are moments where it feels good and there's sort of an expansiveness. And there are moments when there's the clench and suddenly things close in again. Our practice, our fundamental practice, is mindfulness of the body. And the body is this amazing reflection of the mind. You've probably heard the phrase used by a lot of massage therapists, how your issues are in your tissues. How your emotions they're psychobiological events. That you're aware of anger, but the anger lives on the inside. And there's a lot of fruit in that investigation. So wherever you direct the mind, you may notice that there is something about the formation of what we call the felt sense, of how your body will reflect that thought, or it'll reflect that emotion. So a little Zen pop quiz, if you would. If you can close your eyes, we'll do a little 90-second meditation. And as you close the eyes, you might deepen your breath. Just feel the breath on the inside. And take a few moments, if you would, just to kind of go through the files of your friends, those people you know. And you might think of someone in your life or someone you know who's struggling right now. And you might just take a few moments to think about them. Can you imagine what they're feeling right now in their struggle? And you might, in your own way, just let them know that you are aware of them now. That you care about their suffering. In your own way, to hold them in loving presence. And as you do so, can you locate what that feels like on the inside? And you might, if you like, just to bring your hand to where you feel this felt sense form on the inside. Wishing them well. And then, if you would, you can keep your hand right where it is. And you might let your eyes open and just take a look around at where you see the hands around you. So there's this collective felt sense. For some, the heart, for some, the face. Where the mind goes, the body reflects. So this primary area where we're invited to pay attention is this immediate, energetic response to stimuli. It's the raw data of this moment. What happens, often without us knowing, is we experience something in the felt sense, in the body, in the nervous system, and our mind immediately runs an interpretation on it, where we'll label it as unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral. And then without even being aware of that, we then move into a response. It's purely biological. We're designed to move away from pain and to move toward pleasure. That's a big part of our evolution. You don't eat the red berries because they'll make you sick, and you don't eat the red berries and you continue to live. So there's a natural self-preservation response to that pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Where we perceive threat, we move into a stress response. The brain perceives danger. All these hormones release from the brain. The blood is shunted away from the belly. It runs out to the limbs. The eyes dilate. And you get ready to move into fight, flight, or freeze. Again, it's a very healthy, normal reaction. The challenge is, particularly in our culture now, so much of the threat is psychological. So if you have a phone call you're dreading to make next week, and your mind dwells on it, it has the same effect as if you were in mortal danger. So much of what we're reacting to are just phantoms. Quite often, we react and clench around imaginary threats. Or we perceive some threats as not real that are actually real. So what can be so helpful in the practice is to slow it all down. To notice this process of how the moment is arising in your nervous system and how you're relating to it, how you're holding it. So this sense of how we perceive is fascinating to me. And I was doing a little bit of research around how animals respond, the lenses that they use. And imagine a bat. If a bat was in this room, it would be using echolocation, where it would be sending out sonar to determine where things are to get feedback as to where it is. It's not just bats, it's cave-dwelling birds and eels. They have this amazing capacity to navigate their way simply through the reflection of sound vibration. Another is the perception of magnetic fields. When salmon spawn, and cows tend to face either north or south when they rest, there's this perception of magnetism that guides them. Another is the electromagnetic spectrum. How bees and butterflies see ultraviolet, so they can go directly to the sweet spot in a flower. All we see is yellow. Well, what a bee sees is a bullseye. Another is pheromones. How ants, in particular, use chemical smells to communicate all kinds of information. Come this way, here's a problem, here's a situation, here's an opportunity, step aside, attack. All of this is communicated through these clouds of pheromones. So why is this helpful in meditation? There are subtle energies that we are constantly responding to. The more you slow down, the more you can register this moment to moment to moment perception of what's happening and noting how your body is holding it. So maybe another quick little practice. If you like, you can close your eyes. Sound meditation can be a powerful practice. There is a term called bare attention, which is listening without a label. So you're just tuning into the energetic vibration of sound. You might just notice the sounds around you right now. And with the sound of the bamboo flute, you might just sense if you can both register the vibration of the sound, but also to sense how you receive the sound. Notice if you can in these moments to experience sound as vibration. Notice now if you can open your attention to the whole body. This perception of vibration, a pulse, a sense of receiving the moment directly through the senses. And can you sense the responding of pleasant, neutral, unpleasant? Catching it almost before it gets interpreted by the brain. If you like, you can deepen the breath. And if you like, you can open the eyes. so much of the practice is around moving from the story of our experience to the direct experience of our experience. And with this foundation of just the raw, energetic experience of here and now, it's translated as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then quite often before we know it, it moves right up into thought forms. And it can move into simply a chain of thoughts. The other morning when I was meditating, I was trying to record the chain of thoughts. And it went something like this. Boy, that heating system's really loud. It's kind of irritating. What is that? Is it a bad bearing or something? No, I'm too warm. Should I take off my sweater? But then it's going to be cold. I don't like being cold. I can't believe I lived in Wisconsin and New England all those years. Why did I do that? I'm just not self-directed enough in my life. I just kind of go with the flow, but I'm not really... I just get chronically overextended, and I don't like saying no to people, and that's why I can't trust myself. Oh, wait a minute. What? Oh, this is doubt. Oh, right, come back to the breath. Yeah, okay. Boy, that heating system is loud. What is that, a bad bearing or something? I'm too warm now. Can you relate? So the practice is so utterly simple. Notice the breath when the breath is long. Notice the breath when the breath is short. Be aware of walking when you're walking. Be aware of eating when you're eating. It's so simple. You may know that story of the Zen master with his young pupils. When they'd be reading their scripture, he would just stand over them and say, when you read, read. That was pretty much all his instruction was, when you read, read, one-pointed. When they'd be having their meals, he would stand over and say, when you eat, eat. As the story goes, late one night, students were hungry, they snuck into the kitchen. There was their teacher reading the newspaper, eating a bowl of rice. They stood around him. They knew they didn't have to say anything because they had him busted. And he looked up and he looked at all of them and he said, when you eat and read, eat and read. So we're practicing non-judging awareness. That's my preferred definition of mindfulness. And that is the direct, energetic experience of here and now. Observing that as best we can without judgment. Noticing how that raw data of energy forms into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. To be aware of that. To notice the thought forms that arise. The proliferation of thoughts, which are the stories, the memories, the narrative, the emotions, all of that arises out of the energy of here and now. And this gives us a window into our conditioning. Here you get to observe your associations, your memories, your stories. And noticing the stream of thought forms can be quite interesting. Toward the end of my mother's life, as she was in pretty severe dementia, it was like listening to someone narrate a dream. There'd just be random thoughts that her mind was trying to stream into a consistent narrative. And that's kind of what our mind is doing. It's keeping a story going to keep things linear. But there's more than just energy and felt sense and thoughts. It's actually when you practice non-judging awareness, you can then become aware of kind of the thought forms, kind of referred to as the Dhammas. And that can be the recognition of these primal energies, as Pat was describing so beautifully. You can recognize, wow, there are thoughts that fall in the category of aversion. And there are the thoughts that fall in the category of wanting, and the thoughts that fall in the category of worry, and the thoughts that have to do with sloth and torpor, all the thoughts that have to do with doubt and that ruthless self-critic. At that level of non-judging awareness, we can then begin to see into the three characteristics of reality. The recognition of like, my God, everything conditioned is changing. Anything I try to control is going to have a quality of suffering to it. And who is this self that's observing anyway? We begin to see into impermanence and suffering and the nature of self. You can then begin to see into the qualities of kind of the whole foundation of the practice, to see that suffering is part of this human experience, that if you track down anything, any complaint, at its very root, it will have some form of attachment, some form of identification. You'll see that it's possible to let it go. And that there are practices and teachings that cultivate this practice of letting go. You begin to recognize more and more intimately the nature of reality and how it's showing up in your life. So there's this kind of this beautiful chain of causality, I think, of sometimes that something arises just energetically out of nowhere, or wherever it comes from. We react to it with a thought. If you think that same thought over and over and over again, that thought calcifies as a belief. If you're not aware of the belief becomes a habit. And if you're not aware of your habits, that becomes your character. And if you're not aware of the conditioning of your character, that becomes your destiny. And you can hang out at any one of those levels. But a very, very powerful level is to go right back to the source, back to the energetic experience of here and now. To notice, if you can, as best you can, what arises from the moment. If you can notice that mechanism of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. If you can catch the thoughts that proliferate from that, it becomes a real practice of seeing more clearly. And the possibility of gaining more freedom in your life. So then the question becomes, how can we use this awareness of these foundations of awareness when we're stuck and when you're caught? And this is where the practice of rain can be so powerful. We've spent the first many days of our retreat gathering attention, developing more concentration, more presence. And while it may not feel like you have. You can't not by staying in the practice. And I spoke earlier of the circle with the line through it, and how you can move the line between what you're aware of and what you're not aware of by relaxing and paying attention. And the line is moving. You're perhaps feeling things you hadn't felt before. Maybe you're more aware of the habitual thought forms. Maybe you're more aware of your top 10. The top 10 stories that just keep cycling through. You may be more aware from time to time of some beliefs that you're holding on to. All that becomes really valuable. So to review this practice of rain in the little bit of time I have left, to remember that the practice is really made up of two wings. One is the wing of wisdom, your capacity to see clearly. That is to penetrate through your preferences, your embellishments, your stories, to what's actually happening, to see what's true, and to cultivate compassion, your capacity to be with, to hold your experience, your access to empathy, to compassion, to loving presence, if you will. So when you encounter physical pain, emotional turmoil, mental agitation, you can turn your attention from your anchor to let the anchor recede and bring yourself into an investigation, to have tea with what's there. And there's one little tweak here that's made all the difference in my life. When I turn to investigate something that's between me and feeling free, and it's a big distinction for me, and it's letting go of trying to figure it out, and instead to have an intention to get more familiar with it. And I find when I just move into it, can I just be more familiar with this? It softens things. It opens my intuition to be with it as opposed to figure it out so I can nuke it and make sure it never comes back. So when you turn your attention to physical pain, emotion, strong mental state, we're oftentimes habituated to explore it through thoughts, to look at the stories we've associated to it. That can be very, very helpful. But there's a big distinction that I've found, and it's the distinction between your biography and your biology. Your biography is the story. It's understanding the causes and conditions. It's really seeing the influences that have shaped your character and how your survival skills and your thriving skills and all of that. Very, very helpful. But there's an opportunity here to explore the biology. And that is to move from the story to the experience. What does it feel like inside? So I find if I'm caught in some kind of irritation or anger, I'm in a story around it, and I can loop on that one for decades. But if I decide that I'm going to investigate this, I might sort of recognize it. Okay, here's anger and irritation. And I'll ask, can I be with it? And again, sometimes you can't. You don't have the energy. Or you're going to be flooded, or it's just not the right time. Incredibly wise. Let it know you see it. Another time when the conditions are different. But if it does feel an open opportunity, is it possible to move from the story into the felt sense, into the energetic experience? Where we tend to feel is the midline and the core, the jaw, the throat, the heart, the belly, certainly throughout the rest of the body, but primarily here. And I find when you tune in to that felt sense, to how your nervous system holds a memory, there'll be three basic qualities. One is it'll be strong and unmistakable. It's the lump in your throat. It's the burning around your eyes like you're about to cry. It's that twisted feeling in your guts like something horrible is going to happen. You can't miss it. That's one category. The second is when you do your investigation is you might notice that feeling it'll just flicker. Or it'll be like a blip and then disappear. So you might feel like, oh, wow, I thought I felt something really sad, but I can't find it now. And again, it's below the line. It's the third category is really kind of where the subtlety of investigation comes in, where sustaining concentration comes in. And that is that feeling will be vague and unformed. It's not clear yet. It's below the line. And so here, that level of attentiveness is part of the skillful means, part of the artistry. I find that when I sense that there's something, and that's a real magic word, there's something here. There's something just kind of heavy in my sternum, kind of running down into my gut. If you could imagine it as a child that doesn't have words, or imagine it as an animal that it can't tell you what it is, but it's that degree of listening, that degree of attentiveness. So what is this? And then there are questions you can ask that can help to guide you toward the N part of rain. And again, the N is nourishing what you find with kindness or compassion. The questions I find very, very helpful, and I'll vary them sometimes. One is, how does this want me to be with it right now? Or I might even say it directly to that feeling. How do you want me to be with you right now? And then listen. Sometimes there may be something that arises. Or there may be a sense of, well, what does this need to feel more whole? And then listen. This is an art as much as it's a science. And it's really fueled by this desire to really be more familiar with what is presenting to you. One thing that's guaranteed in practice, when you sit with an intention, however you language your intention, if your intention is to be more awake, if your intention is to be more alive, if your intention is to be more present, if your intention is to be enlightened, everything that isn't that is going to find you. That's what it's all about. And one of the reasons why I love so much hanging out with real practitioners, as I like to say, is if you're with another practitioner and they might say, well, how are you doing? And you might say, I just have this low-grade sense of despair and just a sense of hopelessness. And the other person will say, God, that's great. That's wonderful. Because there's an understanding here that we are actually, this is a practice of having tea with our demons. Having tea with those primal energies that are wanting to be seen and felt and understood. I'm reminded of a line by T.S. Eliot, who said that the cost of this practice is nothing less than everything. In the practice of meditation, in fact, one of my sort of like Kensho awakening experiences was once in an interview at Spirit Rock, where I was sort of describing my experience, and the teacher just said, you said, in this practice, there's nothing off stage. And that just struck me in such a powerful way. There's so many times in my own practice where I feel like I'm really ready for my practice, and then I'm visited by something, and I'll just think, anything but this. Not this. But as Rumi said, it's about inviting whoever comes, because they have been sent from the beyond. When we practice receiving the moment directly through the senses, it's also a practice of opening with that intention to welcome everything and everything. Because the more you practice, the more I am confident in saying, you will develop more and more confidence. You will build your capacity for for equanimity, the capacity to be with anything that comes your way. So why don't we close with a few minutes of practice together? And you might, in your own way, just as sense and welcome this vibration of presence as it is. Can you sense the subtlest of moving toward or against what arises moment to moment to moment? Can you sense who you are as this vast, limitless space in which your experience arises and changes? Can you allow? Can you let it be? Can you let it flow? Thank you. You may have noticed when I played the flute how the sounds didn't come out right. The first time I was playing in public and I couldn't get the armature right, I went into like a flop sweat. Because I play in public a lot, I found as I look back about every 18 times, I just can't get the armature right, and I'm really proud to say it really didn't bother me. So.